Jacob returned to his room, opened a transparent energy sphere with his identity token, and sat in it. The crowded examination area suddenly became silent. The inspectors, who wore silver silk robes, stepped on their treasures and entered the written examination area. The structure, made up thousands of black-roofed rooms, seemed like an enormous black border, surrounding the dragon god shrine at the center. These rooms, that were used only once a year, were the outer city of the dragon god shrine. The black dragon god shrine and the nearby white arenas in 4 directions were surrounded by these thousands of rooms, and the dragon god shrine could be considered the inner city. For this written examination, in the middle of the night, the dragon god shrine sent hundreds of inspectors to supervise their respective areas. Jacob knew if Kenith were to take part in the general examinations, he would come to this written examination tonight. But with the scale of the written exam at the dragon god shrine, finding Kenith would be harder than reaching the heavens. The hundreds of inspectors dashed through the alleyways between rooms, swiftly checking the situation in each room. An inspector walked past the path in front of Jacob. He saw Jacob's silver dragon embroideries on his shoulders, and his different face got a little warm as he nodded slightly. Jacob nodded back in response. From such a simple gesture, Jacob knew that in the examination process, the official inspectors would favor the assisting inspectors. That was why, when the cultivators at his university knew that they could take the position of assisting inspector from Jacob, they desperately challenged him. The 2 cultivators in the rooms beside Jacob saw the official inspector nodding at Jacob, and they were envious. However, what could they do? They weren't assisting inspectors. The quota for assisting inspectors was limited. Basically, they were sponsored by official inspectors, and each official inspector could at most have 1 assisting inspector. Assisting inspectors were usually very strong and had a high chance of passing the exam. Otherwise, the official inspector wouldn't take such a burden. That inspector flew away, and Jacob's row of rooms fell into silence once again. Time slipped by. Although thousands were waiting for the examination to start, it was silent. Then, a burst of noise came. Jacob looked up and saw Tom on his golden weaving shuttle, flying towards Jacob's room. The strong aura almost lifted a few tiles off the rooms. Tom suddenly stopped and hovered in front of Jacob's room. He was wearing a silver silk robe, but it had a bright 4-clawed golden dragon embroidered on his shoulder. The 4-clawed golden dragon represented the status of Tom, a level 4 inspector. Behind Tom, 2 accompanying inspectors had 3-clawed golden dragons embroidered on their shoulders. A level 4 inspector with 2 level 3 inspectors came here only to see the cultivator in 246? Who is this assisting inspector? When the 2 cultivators who were sitting in their rooms on either side of Jacob's room saw this, they were so shocked that they couldn't utter a word. They had taken part in a few general examinations and were quite familiar with the written exam. However, they had never seen or heard of anything like this. Usually the written examination area was patrolled by level 1 and level 2 inspectors. Level 3 inspectors were not required, not to mention level 4. Do you like this environment? Does it fit you? Jacob raised his head and looked at Tom. He snorted lightly and didn't answer. Tom was standing on his golden weaving shuttle, meaning that his natal treasure had been returned to him. That was because Susan, a level 3 inspector, didn't want to fight with him in the Dragon God Shrine, so she returned his treasure. Perhaps you don't know yet, but I'm one of the 4 main examiners this year, and I'm responsible for the East area. Tom hovered midair, staring at Jacob. You happen to be in my area. The 2 cultivators who were in the 2 rooms to the left and right of Jacob listened as their ears turned hot. With the special care of a level 4 inspector, who is one of the 4 main examiners, seems like this cultivator is absolutely going to be an official inspector, they thought. If they had known earlier they would not have cared about their faces and fawned over the insisting Inspector Jacob. "You arranged this deliberately, didn't you?" Jacob asked. "Yes." "So what?" Tom sneered, staring at Jacob. This time, he was chosen to be one of the main examiners responsible for the East area. As one of the 4 highest examiners, he had 6 Level 4 inspectors as his aide. This made him immeasurably prestigious. This meant that during the examination period, Tom would be one of the 4 most powerful inspectors. Even Susan couldn't go against him during this time period, as it would influence the main examiner's decision. "Since there are too few metal elemental dragons, you were probably chosen because they want to balance everything out," Jacob scoffed. Tom was only at 7th level, and there were more than a few level 4 inspectors in the Dragon God Shrine. Therefore, it did seem like Tom was chosen for reasons other than pure strength. Jacob pointed out the reality, and it made Tom burn with rage. There weren't many metal elemental dragons, but they were far more powerful compared with other dragon cultivators. There were quite a few young metal elemental dragon cultivators who reached the 7th and even 8th level, and their pride was way beyond the 4 ocean dragon clans. Therefore, metal elemental dragons were never interested in taking part in the general examinations in the Dragon God Shrine. Jacob's words undoubtedly touched a sensitive nerve within Tom. Tom seemed powerful, but he was barely in the mid-tier in the entire Metal Elemental Dragon clan. Becoming an inspector in the Dragon God Shrine was not something that a Metal Elemental Dragon should be proud of. "Sir, please calm down." Seeing Tom's twisted facial expression, the 2 level 3 inspectors hurriedly advised. Tom was one of the 4 main examiners this year. If he attacked a cultivator who was taking part in the exams, the consequences would be dire. "You have guts. Susan indeed taught you." Tom gritted his teeth. "I'll see how you do in tomorrow's combat exams." The reason why the written exam was held at night was for the quietness. If Tom couldn't hold back and attack Jacob, resulting in loud noises, that would attract lots of attention. Then, the scene would get ugly. Jacob knew clearly that since he was assigned to Tom's area, the latter would try everything to deal with him in various ways. Therefore, the result of angering Tom was the same as not angering him. So, Jacob didn't hold back at all. At this moment, the 2 cultivators beside Jacob were so surprised they didn't even dare to raise their heads. Just a moment ago, they were regretting not befriending Jacob, and now they were afraid that Tom might vent his rage on them, thinking that they were together with Jacob. So, this level 4 inspector is not the assisting inspector's superior, but his enemy, they thought. It was common for grudges to occur between inspectors due to some conflicts, but a tiny assisting inspector dared to challenge the authority of a level 4 inspector? That was very hard to believe. The 2 cultivators beside Jacob were scared and worried that Tom's fiery glance would land upon them. "Sir, the written exam is about to begin in half an hour officially," a level 3 inspector reminded Tom. "Tell the proctor of this area to keep an eye on him for me. If there's any kind of fraudulent behavior, kill him instantly." Tom's face turned green as he said ruthlessly, "Understood." The 2 level 3 inspectors hastily bowed. In fact, they complained in their hearts. Before they came here with Tom, they were asked by Susan to take good care of the cultivator in room 246. Everybody in Dragon God Shrine knew that Susan had the highest chance of reaching the heavenly dragon realm among all the inspectors. Even though she fell from a level 4 inspector to a level 3 inspector, nobody dared to look down on her. However, Tom had the support of the Metal Elemental Dragon clan, so he was also a hot potato. Tom and Susan's attitudes differed on the treatment of this assisting inspector. One wanted to suppress him, while the other wanted to pull him up. Tom stepped on his golden weaving shuttle and flew away. The 2 inspectors looked at each other and quietly exchanged a few words before flying towards the Dragon God Shrine as well. The bell rang. It was 11 at night. The inspectors on standby immediately dashed through the alleyways and threw the test papers into the rooms. Jacob picked up his long exam paper, saw the dense questions, and panicked a little. All of them were short answer questions. The time limit for the written exam was only 2 hours. Jacob picked up his ink brush, infused it with nature essence, and dripped the words onto the paper like raindrops. If it weren't for the vague memory of painting with Susan together, Jacob wouldn't even know how to use an ink brush. All the rooms emanated writing noises. The written exam was not difficult, but it would eliminate a bunch of cultivators. The anxiety was not inferior to the feeling that Jacob had when he was taking his SATs. The inspector who received the order of keeping an eye on Jacob really sat in the path outside Jacob's room and stared at Jacob. It was commonly known that the most unpleasant thing when writing a test was being stared at. Right now, Jacob felt like rushing out and beating him up. Time's up. Jacob held the ink brush in his hand. He had still one more paragraph to finish. The inspector sitting in front of Jacob stood up quickly and collected the papers. The combat exams would start at 5 in the morning, an inspector announced loudly. There were only 4 hours for the participants to rest before the combat exams began. All the exam papers would be marked in those 4 hours, and those who couldn't pass would be directly kicked out. For the cultivators who were confident in passing the written exam, this time was for them to replenish their energy and stretch. Riding all night long, followed by many battles? This really is awfully tough, Jacob thought as he went to the front of the room and was about to stretch. Suddenly, he saw a set of familiar boxing techniques being practiced in the alleyway in front of him. The North Atlantic Dragon Palace's fundamental boxing techniques. Jacob took a closer look and saw that it was the fundamental boxing technique that the soldiers in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace practice every day. The familiar techniques and the burly body belonged to none other than Kenith. Jacob's heart lurched. Quickening his steps, he ran to the alley entrance hundreds of meters away from him. The cultivators moving in the alley got angry when they were pushed aside by Jacob, but they held their anger when they saw that he was an assisting inspector. After practicing the boxing technique, Kenith swung his arms around before walking into the alleyway to his right. "Elder Kenith!" Jacob called out immediately. However, Kenith didn't hear him since he had walked into the aisle between 2 rows of rooms. "Who's making such noise?" A level 2 inspector who was patrolling nearby flew down from the sky. Although the written exams was over and there was still some time until the combat exams, this time was for the cultivators to rest and replenish their energy. No noise was allowed. When he saw it was an assisting inspector who made the noise, the inspector's anger abated a little, but he still struck his treasure on Jacob's chest, forcing him back 3 steps. "No noise is allowed in the area." After giving him a warning, the inspector walked out slowly. The nearby cultivators looked at Jacob and envied him. If he were an ordinary cultivator, he would have been kicked out of the Dragon God Shrine by the inspector for yelling. He would be disqualified and probably be forbidden to enter the Dragon God Shrine's general exams for the next 3 years. However, since he was an assisting inspector, he just got a warning. That was why the identity of assisting inspector was an object of envy. However, after the interruption, Jacob couldn't see a trace of Kenith when he ran to the aisle. It was early morning. The sky was still dark. The light was dim in the area with many rooms. The cultivators moving around the rooms were all wearing the same brown robe, and Jacob couldn't find Kenith among them, no matter how hard he looked. With his identity as an assisting inspector, he dashed into the aisle, and no cultivator dared to stop him. Jacob searched the rooms one by one, but he didn't find Kenith. He searched in the nearby aisles. The result was the same. Less than 4 hours were left before the combat exams, which began at 5 in the morning, and many cultivators were taking this time to cultivate it. The written exam area prohibited noises, so Jacob couldn't call out, making it harder for him to find Kenith. However, he was confident that Kenith was nearby. This area was not far from Jacob's room, which meant that Kenith and Jacob belonged to the same exam area. Since they were in the same exam area for the written exam, they would belong to the same area for the combat exams. Jacob might even need to fight with Kenith later on. Jacob wondered what realm Soph's uncle had reached while he walked back to his room. In the two rooms next to his, the two cultivators were sitting cross-legged on their chairs, cultivating. Sensing Jacob's return, they opened their eyes and looked at him, but they didn't speak. Anyone who dared to confront a main examiner was undoubtedly a dangerous person. They obviously didn't want to get involved with him. Jacob remained silent. After returning to his room, he also closed his eyes to cultivate. The exam venue before dawn looked quiet and peaceful, but in fact everyone was busy preparing for the exam. This was the calm before the storm. The cultivators who were chatting with each other at the entrance of the aisles probably would engage in life-and-death battles a few hours later in the arenas. The bell from the Dragon God Shrine rang again. It was 5 a.m. Hundreds of inspectors came out together once again. All the cultivators who had written the exam tensed up instantly. From one room in Jacob's row, an identity token flew out into an inspector's hand. The owner of the token had failed the written exam and lost his qualification to enter the combat exams. Another wooden token suddenly flew from the waist of a cultivator. Then one by one, the inspectors flew across the rows of rooms, and wooden tokens flew up. It wasn't easy to pass the written exam. Nervously, Jacob gripped the wooden token on his waist, afraid that it would fly out as well. On the test papers, there were only the participants' numbers and not designations, so Jacob could fail the written exam as well if he got the answers wrong. However, the Level 2 inspector passed by Jacob's room without taking his identity token. Jacob heard the sighs of relief from the cultivators of the neighboring rooms, and they knew they had been nervous too. The identity tokens that flew into the inspector's hands quickly turned black, which meant that these numbers were no longer valid, and the dragon cultivators who corresponded to those numbers were disqualified from the next portion of the exams. The cultivators who failed the written exam packed up and left sadly. The dark red light surrounding the platform of the Dragon God Shrine suddenly vanished. The Dragon God Shrine was open to the public again. The failed cultivators could go back home or stay to watch the battles. Those cultivators who didn't enter the Dragon God Shrine yesterday were able to enter now. Following the crowd, Jacob walked to the arenas in the inner city and observed the Dragon God Shrine from close up. In the white morning light, the Dragon God Shrine looked like a huge black city, giving people a sense of suppression. The platform around the Dragon God Shrine, including the outer city and the inner city, was only open for 3 days each year for the general exams. However, the interior of the Dragon God Shrine was never open to the public. No one except official inspectors and criminals, who inspectors caught, could enter the Black Palace. This rule added mystery to the Dragon God Shrine. 3 level 4 inspectors walked out of the Dragon God Shrine and sat on the 3 armchairs, the watching stand, which was slightly higher than the arenas. In each of the 4 directions of the Dragon God Shrine, 24 small arenas surrounded one big arena. There was altogether 96 small arenas and 4 big arenas. Jacob was in the east area, which Tom was responsible for. However, as one of the main examiners, Tom didn't seem concerned about the preliminary battles, since he didn't come out from the Dragon God Shrine. Instead, he had asked 3 deputies to come out and keep order. Besides the 3 deputy examiners who monitored the battles, there were a lot of Level 1 and Level 2 inspectors who were responsible for keeping scores and arranging competitions. Since the general exams at the Dragon God Shrine were a grand event in the Dragon Tribe, the organization temporarily called back many inspectors. As a result, the number of inspectors back at the Dragon God Shrine reached a peak. Standing in the crowd, Jacob looked around and didn't see Susan. If Susan were here wearing a silver silk robe like the other inspectors, it'd be easy to find her. Many inspectors wearing silver robes were walking around the arenas, while the participants wearing brown robes were standing beside the field. Before each small arena stood a sign, and there were altogether 24 of them. Each sign had a set of numbers on them, indicating a set of rooms. Jacob's room number was 246, so he went and stood beside the sign that read 1 to 300, along with his neighbors. Built with 3 white rocks, the arena was 10 meters long, 10 meters wide, and 1 meter higher than the platform. 101 versus 102. 103 versus 104. The Level 2 inspector responsible for their arena declared in a loud voice. 245 versus 246. Jacob suddenly turned to look at the cultivator who was his neighbor on the left during the written exam last night, and the person who looked to be in his 40s also turned to look at Jacob alertly. Jacob? While Jacob was about to do some warm-up exercises for the competition, a clear voice sounded in the sky. He looked up and saw Helen's treasure, the mountain river painting floating over. As the energy sphere of the Dragon God Shrine opened up, Helen flew in with Sophie and others. As a top-tier treasure, the mountain river painting was bright and fast, attracting people's attention when Helen maneuvered it to the arenas with her group on it. "Jacob, we're rooting for you!" Sophie stepped down from the painting and said to Jacob cheerfully. It was her first time watching Jacob compete in a formal match, and she could only think of such simple words to encourage him. "I'll try my best," Jacob smiled at her. Looking around, Noah crossed his arms in front of his chest and seemed unconcerned about how far Jacob could go in the competition. Kathy also looked around with fascination. She was still not used to being among so many cultivators. The senior members of the Dragon Palace who came with Helen's family were only General Arthur, Elder Liam, and Elder Frank. Jade and Julia were also with them, whispering to each other. "Jacob, have you seen Kenith since you came here yesterday?" Draken asked. Sophie, who was looking around, heard this question. She stared at Jacob with widened eyes as well. Elder Kenith. Jacob thought for a bit and replied. "He should be somewhere around here, only I think I saw him in the written exam area." "Oh, really?" Draken brightened up. "With his cultivation strength, Uncle Kenith will win the first few competitions for sure. It'll be easy to find him by that time," Jacob said. "Yeah, you're right." Draken lowered his head and thought for a few seconds, before turning his gaze to Jacob again. "I'll go into the Dragon God Shrine. You can focus on the competition." "Dad, don't you want to watch Jacob compete?" Sophie called out immediately. Draken smiled, but didn't answer. Jacob immediately felt that Draken didn't hold high hopes for him in the competition. His purpose for coming to the Dragon God Shrine was to look for Kenith and negotiate with the Dragon God Shrine. "Elder Liam, Elder Frank, come with me." Draken looked back at the two and said, "Yes, Your Majesty." The two elders followed Draken immediately. Seeing them leave, Sophie immediately grabbed onto Helen. Helen looked at Sophie and smiled. "I'll stay here and watch the competition with you." Sophie was relieved, since she thought Helen would also go to the Dragon God Shrine. While Draken led two elders to the gate of the Dragon God Shrine, the participants and the Dragon Clan forces who were here recognized Draken. Isn't he the king of the North Atlantic? And behind him are two elders from the North Atlantic. Why are they here? Instantly, questions arose in the mind of the people in the area. From the gate of the Dragon God Shrine walked out two inspectors wearing robes embroidered with 4-clawed golden dragons. They welcomed Draken and the two elders of the North Atlantic into the palace. Since its establishment hundreds of years ago, the Dragon God Shrine had never allowed any dragon cultivators except inspectors and criminals into the interior of the Dragon God Shrine. Not even the Dragon Kings. Obviously, they made an exception for Draken. The present Dragon King of the North Atlantic Dragon Palace brought only two elders into the Dragon God Shrine, and it brought all kinds of speculations to people's minds. Watching Draken disappear into the Dragon God Shrine, Jacob was also a bit worried as well. However, on second thought, he thought that Draken's high-profile entrance into the Dragon God Shrine was probably an act for Kenith's sake as well. If Kenith were around, he would undoubtedly know that Draken was also here. If he wanted to know the content of the negotiation between North Atlantic and Dragon God Shrine, he would have to find Draken. It was Draken's way of forcing Kenith to show himself. 101 and 102. The inspector responsible for Jacob's arena called out. The two cultivators were ready, and they jumped into the arena simultaneously. Jacob looked around at the other arenas and saw that competitions had begun. Unlike the written exam, the combat exams were open to the public, and some elders stood around the arenas where participants from their respective forces were battling. Almost 10,000 dragon cultivators were gathered around the east area alone, not to mention the other three big areas. These dragon clans came from different places on the land, and their elders who were responsible for internal business rarely had an opportunity to meet each other. The Dragon God Shrine's general exams provided such a meeting place. The cultivators who were recommended by different forces to enter the general exams represented the highest cultivation strength of their generation in their dragon clan. According to their performances and rankings, the elders from different clans could determine their statuses in the entire dragon tribe and strategize for the near future, keep low or advance aggressively. While Jacob was looking around, one cultivator fell from one of the 24 arenas. The identity token hanging on the waist of the fallen cultivator automatically flew into the hand of the inspector before turning black immediately. The third-level cultivator who fell to the ground looked a bit upset. Standing up immediately, he brushed the dust off his robe and walked away. No elders came to him, which meant the cultivator entering the test of his own instead of being a future star of a dragon clan. While Jacob was looking at the retreating back of the cultivator, another pair of rivals had stepped up into the arena. While cultivators fell from the 24 arenas, the elimination matches went on quickly. 245 versus 246, the inspector declared. Jacob leaped into the arena. His rival, the cultivator in his 40s, kicked the ground lightly with his toes and jumped easily into the arena too. Wearing a brown robe with an embroidered silver dragon, Jacob immediately attracted people's attention. The eastern test area had about 10,000 cultivators around the 24 small arenas, and each of the arenas was a center of attention. The arena was only 1 meter higher than the ground, but Jacob felt entirely different than when he was standing on the ground. "Jacob, go!" Standing by Helen, Sophie clenched her fists and yelled. Kathy just stared at Jacob with wide eyes. Noah looked unconcerned, but he glanced at Jacob from the corner of his eye. The hunchbacked General Arthur stood straighter and looked up at Jacob's dashing form in the arena. "Master, go!" Jade and Julia yelled at the same time, attracting the attention of nearby young cultivators. "After you," the cultivator opposite Jacob bowed. "After you." Jacob stepped back half a step and made a stance too. The cultivator in his 40s released a long sword from his palm. Natal treasure. His presence was also released. 4th level. In a flash, this 4th level cultivator rushed to Jacob's side. Standing below the arena, Sophie gripped Helen's hand. Jacob lifted his right hand to block the sword. Upon closer look, one could see a pale green light in Jacob's palm. His left foot took half a step forward, and his right hand pushed out onto his opponent's shoulder. The push looked casual, but it sent the cultivator flying. The 4th level cultivator dropped below the arena, crashing into some watching cultivators. He stumbled back a few steps before regaining his balance. "Thank you," Jacob bowed and said crisply. His attack was quick and determined, blocking his rival's attack and pushing him out of the arena in one move. More importantly, he maintained a calm expression like a master during the whole process. Helen had expected Jacob would win, but she was surprised he had defeated his rival so quickly. "Mom, Jacob is awesome!" Seeing Jacob defeat his rival with one attack, Sophie grabbed Helen's arm and said in excitement. Jacob jumped down out of the arena and looked up to watch the next competition. Glancing at the calm expression on Jacob's face, Helen admired his calmness, modesty, and brains, thinking that he could become a great figure one day. He didn't launch the sword shadow scroll, so he couldn't hide his technique. He injected nature energy into his palms to defeat his rival with boxing techniques to save most of his nature essence for future battles. Jacob is careless about minor things, but his clear thinking and careful strategy on major issues far surpassed my expectations, Helen thought. Back on the ground, Jacob watched the next battle in the arena silently without blinking. He was not watching for fun, but watching to find out the cultivator's techniques and methods of defense and attack, since any of them could become his future rival. Jacob was representing the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, and Helen hoped that he would protect the honor of the North Atlantic Dragon Palace with his excellent performance. In the arena, 247, who was Jacob's neighbor on the right during the writing exam, lost in the competition shortly. After half of the cultivators were eliminated, the second round began. 244 versus 246. Jacob got into the arena again, and this time he used 2 attacks before he sent the third level cultivator flying. 246 versus 249. 210 versus 246. 132 versus 246. With the calls of the inspector, Jacob went into the arena and beat all his rivals out of the arena with crisp moves. While she watched, Helen saw some clues. She found Jacob was using the fundamental boxing technique that was familiar to all the soldiers of the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. With Jacob's winning streak, Sophie got more and more excited. She cheered for him the loudest. She suddenly felt like Jacob was very powerful. None of the cultivators could last more than 3 rounds of attacks with Jacob. While Jacob won another match, cheers exploded in the audience around the arena on his left. A brawny man with his face painted completely black and a black beard stepped to one side in the stands and launched a punch, sending a 5th level cultivator with yellow light around him flying more than 10 meters out of the arena. It was one of the fundamental boxing techniques of the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. This time, Jacob clearly saw Kenith withdrawing his fist and standing there, magnificently, in an arena on his left. After winning, Kenith looked around, and his gaze finally turned to Jacob, who was 3 small arenas away. The 24 arenas were 1 meter higher than the platform. Therefore, the people who were in the arena could see the battles in the surrounding arenas. At this moment, Jacob and Kenith had defeated their respective opponents and stood in the 2 different arenas, looking at each other across the space. Dozens of meters away, Jacob could still feel the piercing and dominating energy in Kenith's eyes. 168 and 197, the inspector of Kenith's arena declared. After casting another glance at Kenith, Jacob jumped off his arena. The cultivators around the arenas were densely packed together. They couldn't see what was going on more than 1 arena away. "Master, you were awesome!" Jade and Julia immediately walked to Jacob, handing him some water. Seeing Jacob's victories, Sophie's face flushed with joy. "You've won 6 battles consecutively," she said. Everyone who was still in the game all won consecutively. Noah dampened their enthusiasm with his words. His words didn't sound encouraging, but he spoke the truth. After all, this was only the initial selection process, and anyone who wanted to continue forward had to win 7 or 8 battles in a row. Helen smiled at Jacob. It's Jacob's first time participating in the exam, and he is doing a great job. Then she frowned slightly and glanced in the direction of the Dragon God Shrine. 4 hours had passed since the combat exams began, and Draken had been in the Dragon God Shrine with the 2 elders for 4 hours as well. Glancing at Helen, Jacob thought for a while and decided not to tell her about Kenith. From the looks of things, Kenith would definitely win out his set of cultivators. Since Helen was worried about Draken, Jacob decided not to mention Kenith for the time being. In his arena, a 5th level cultivator was in a fierce battle with another 5th level cultivator. As the competition went on, the cultivators with weaker cultivation strength were gradually eliminated. The 3rd level cultivators would be lucky to go to the 2nd or 3rd rounds, but they couldn't win in the 4th or 5th round. The cultivators who would be left standing in the arenas were going to be at least 5th level cultivators. At 4th level, Jacob was a rare exception at this point. In the arena, the cultivator with the 168 identity token hanging on his waist suddenly lifted his wooden bowl, emitting a bright light. The cultivator, with an identity token of 197, condensed a thick layer of yellow armor around him, and the 2 big hammers in his hands released dazzling yellow lights. With equal strength, they couldn't preserve their nature essence anymore, and unleashed their true strengths. 168 suddenly shot out a wooden axe, which instantly pierced 179's armor and his shoulder before flying back with a trace of blood. 179 grunted and tried to fight back, but his right leg was pierced by the wooden axe, which turned and flew back. With a banging noise, the burly cultivator, nearly 2 meters tall, sat down in the arena. Sorry. The 5th level wooden elemental dragon cultivator released a green light beam from the wooden bowl and sent the earth elemental dragon cultivator, with the 179 identity tag, flying out of the arena. Several earth elemental elders standing around the arena immediately rushed over to help this cultivator up. The earth elemental dragon cultivator pushed the elders off him, struggled up with great fortitude, and he looked defiant. Obviously, this 197 was a new star in the earth elemental dragon clan. Having been defeated, there was no use to be upset, and he had no choice but to return to the mountains and cultivate hard for next year's exam. The inspector stood up with a cold expression and yelled, 168 and 246. He didn't even spare a glance at the earth elemental dragon cultivator who failed. After all, such failures were countless during the Dragon God Shrine's exams each year. What the Dragon God Shrine wanted was the top 10 who could become official inspectors, and 40 masters who were going to become assisting inspectors. The cultivators who failed in the early stages were not the ones who the Dragon God Shrine were after, no matter how great their backgrounds were. Standing in the arena, 168 asked for a 15-minute break to adjust. This wood elemental dragon cultivator would fight Jacob, whose number was next. If he won, he would gain 7 consecutive victories and become the champion of the group, earning the qualification to enter the next stage of the exams. At the inspector's nod, 168 hurried out of the arena, and more than 10 wood elemental elders who were waiting around the arena immediately surrounded him. Some helped him smooth out his meridians, while one fed him an elixir pill from a bottle. Some other elders glanced at Jacob and kept giving 168 tips and instructions. In ancient times, if a scholar won first place in the imperial exam, he would bring great benefits to his family. It was the same for the Dragon God Shrine's general exam. If a cultivator became an official inspector, no one would dare to mess with the clan he or she was in, especially to those middle-ranked dragon clans. The more inspectors they had, the more powerful they were. 168 and 246. The break was over, and the inspector stood up again and yelled. The wood elemental dragon cultivator had replenished his nature essence and leaped into the arena. Steadily, Jacob went into the arena, and the silvern dragon embroidery on his shoulders shined in the rising sunlight. The wooden elemental dragon cultivator had observed Jacob's matches and found that he was good at boxing, but he had no treasures or a high realm. Despite that, 168 didn't dare to relax since he was afraid that Jacob had been hiding his true power. He also asked the elders of the clan to observe Jacob's companions. The information he got was very confusing. Among Jacob's cheering group were 2 sisters who looked very powerful, but emitted no lights of dragons. The mother and daughter were respectively at 6th level in the Foundation Establishment realm. Another girl looked like a mortal, without any fluctuations of nature essence, but she had silver and golden lights encircling her like some treasures. A 2nd level kid who looked very fierce. The last person was a hunchbacked old man who was at 6th level, and his lights showed that he came from Water Elemental Dragon Clan. After you. After you. On the arena, the wooden elemental dragon cultivator and Jacob bowed at each other. Jacob's strange support team and his identity as an assisting inspector confused this cultivator, and that was why he decided to suppress Jacob at the very beginning. The wooden bowl in his hand shot a dazzling green light toward Jacob's heart. Green wood scroll. The wood elemental dragon cultivator was only 28 years old, but he'd reached the top tier 5th level, just 1 step away from the 6th level. He was the young star of his clan, and even of the entire wood elemental dragon tribe. If he unleashed his full force, even the elders in his clan were not his match. That was why he was sure that he could suppress Jacob's 4th level power with 1 attack. If Jacob had been hiding his true power, he would force Jacob to show it. Be careful! Seeing the aggressiveness of the wood elemental dragon cultivator, Sophie shouted outside the arena. After all, the previous earth elemental dragon cultivator got his shoulder and right leg pierced just a moment ago. Jacob reached out his hands, and he absorbed the green light coming his way with a wave. The Sword Shadow Scroll Absorb. The power released by the wood elemental treasure that was powered by the green wood scroll contained pure wood elements. and the sword Shadow Scroll had the power of absorbing the 5 elements. Absorbing his opponent's attack looked risky, but Jacob had watched all the matches in this arena, and he remembered each of the 6 matches of this Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator. Know yourself, and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Jacob absorbed the Wood Elemental Nature Essence because he was sure he could do it. The Wood Elemental Nature Essence entered Jacob's body through his palms before going to his feet. In one cycle, the energy was completely devoured. A thin beam of white sword energy shot out from his little finger. Metal Elemental Sword Energy. Metal conquered wood. Almost at the same time, Jacob turned lightly and pushed his palm at 168. The brown wooden axe suddenly shot out from the Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator's forehead. Like a flash, Jacob grabbed the wooden axe while the godly lightning in his palm broke into 2 pieces. The white sword energy arrived at the Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator's side together with Jacob. The Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator raised his hands to block Jacob's palm, but the sword energy hit him in the chest. As he felt numb all over his body and couldn't move, his shoulder was struck heavily by Jacob's palm. Jacob's palm contained more white metal elemental nature essence. Feeling as if his whole body was disintegrated, the Wood Elemental Cultivator took several steps back, not able to defend or attack. As he was forced back, he stepped into the air and fell down. He fell from the huge arena, and dust rose upon his fall. The Wood Elemental Elders hurried over and helped the young cultivator with the identity token 168 up. Thank you. Jacob stood on the edge of the arena and cupped his hands gracefully. Standing on the ground, Sophie looked at Jacob in his fluttering robe with stars in her eyes. Numb and sore all over, the Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator looked up at Jacob with rage and yelled with gritted teeth, "You cheated!" Seeing people turning their eyes to him, he pointed at Sophie and the others with ambiguous backgrounds and yelled, "They must have been assisting him with hidden weapons." "Hey, careful with your words," Sophie stepped up and yelled, pointing her finger at the Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator. "How could a 4th level cultivator win 6 battles consecutively? It must have been you guys who have been assisting him in secret." Looking at Sophie and the people around her, the Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator stood up and yelled. The inspector responsible for this arena ignored this argument and lifted his right hand. The identity token hanging at the waist of this Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator flew into the inspector's hand and turned black instantly. It meant that the Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator was disqualified for the rest of the competition, and the inspector decided that Jacob won the match. "I don't agree. They used hidden weapons. You must investigate them." The Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator pointed at Sophie and the others, yelling in a loud voice. As a young master, it was a big disgrace for him to be defeated by a 4th level cultivator with 2 attacks. "You are a lousy loser. Useless." Sophie got even angrier at the Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator. It instantly enraged the Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator. Standing up, he yelled at the elders by his side, "Elders, teach them a lesson." His clan was a big force in the southeast area, and his Wood Elemental Dragon Cultivator was the son of the Dragon King there. Feeling cheated, he got angry at Sophie's provocation and lost his temper. 246 from the North Atlantic Dragon Palace is the winner. Standing in the arena, the inspector declared. North Atlantic Dragon Palace? Although the inspector's voice was not loud, his words stunned all the cultivators around the arena. North Atlantic Dragon Palace? The Wood Elemental Elders all looked at Sophie and her group in astonishment, and the other forces nearby stared at Helen in bafflement. Each of the 24 arenas would get one final winner whose clan and origin would be declared at the end of the elimination matches. The North Atlantic Dragon Palace also entered the Dragon God Shrine's general exams? The news instantly caused an upheaval around the arena. The elders of the Wood Elemental immediately dragged their young prince out of the area without a fuss. After all, they couldn't afford to mess with the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. Jacob looked over to Kenith's arena, and realized that it was empty as well. It meant that the battles in Kenith's arena had finished earlier. The cultivators beside his own arena were whispering into each other's ears. Jacob was only at the 4th level, but his performance was outstanding in the group. It was unbelievable, but the experienced cultivators knew that it was impossible to cheat. Each arena around the Dragon God Shrine had its own energy sphere, which could resist any nature essence from cultivators below the 7th level. In fact, even if an 8th level or master were to break through the energy sphere, it would cause an obvious quake. Since the cultivators outside of the arena couldn't help, the only one who could influence the outcome of the match would be the 2 participants. Therefore, as many cultivators watched Jacob slowly jump down onto the ground, they were all surprised at this cultivator with the token 246. Great techniques. He seems to be only at the 4th level, yet his strength is impressive, they thought. Helen looked at Jacob in surprise as well. She had thought that he wasn't good at battling, but he appeared to be an experienced cultivator. He was both calm and fast. That wood elemental cultivator didn't even get a chance to use his most powerful technique before Jacob kicked him out of the arena. In Helen's opinion, that cultivator might even had the chance to rank in the top 50 in the general exams. However, Jacob defeated him. Jacob was an absolute surprise to all of them. In war, the key is to trick your enemies. Have them think you're going to use one method but use another. Have them think you're going near them but get very far. Have them think you're going away but get near. Tease them if they are easily triggered. Spoil them if they are timid. Annoy them if they are in peace. Split them if they are united. Attack them when they are least prepared and take actions that surprise them. Jacob seemed to be using random techniques, but he was using the art of war. Helen looked at Jacob differently and thought, who said that he couldn't be the commanding general of North Atlantic? Grandma made you these rolls for you, Jacob. Sophie walked to Jacob, took out a box with 2 rolls inside it, and handed it to him. What did you guys say to Grandma? Jacob asked as he opened the box. I visited her yesterday and told her that you're going on a trip with my family, and we'll be back tomorrow, Sophie answered. Jacob nodded as he quickly ate half a roll. He hadn't had any food since he got to the Dragon God Shrine last night and was starving after so many battles. Sophie giggled when she saw Jacob devouring the food. I made these elixir pills for you to replenish your nature essence. Kathy took a white porcelain bottle out of her pocket and put it in Jacob's hand. Jacob sensed a strong surge of nature essence as soon as he opened it. There are 60 essence replenishment pills, Kathy said. She said it as if it was not a big deal, but these elixir pills were all valuable level 4 elixir pills. When she learned from Helen that Jacob was attending the Dragon God Shrine's general exams, she made them, particularly for Jacob. Thank you very much. Jacob put the bottle into his necklace. He was very grateful for Kathy's concern. If the surrounding cultivators were to see a bottle filled with 60 level 4 essence replenishment pills, they would definitely be extremely jealous. Jacob suddenly felt that something was different and asked Kathy, Did you break through to the Foundation establishment realm? Yeah, I broke through yesterday, she slightly nodded. Oh, congrats. I thought I felt something different about you, Jacob said happily. Kathy used to look a bit weak when she stood beside Sophie. However, her temperament seemed to be even with that of Sophie's today. It's all right. Kathy looked down a little. She used about 20 Foundation establishment pills in total to break through to the Foundation establishment realm. Therefore, it wasn't really something worth congratulating. Jacob looked around and noticed that about 6 more battles were happening right now. The cultivators beside his arena slowly spattered. They either went for a break in the outer city or went to watch the battles in the other arenas. The bell at the Dragon God Shrine rang again. It was noon. There were 96 small arenas from east to west and south to north. All the battles had been completed, and 96 winners had been generated in total within 8 hours. All the level 4 inspectors on the stage entered the Dragon God Shrine. The level 2 inspectors who were in charge of the battle arenas followed their superiors and went back inside as well. They had to issue internal reports, analyze scores, and generate the list. The upcoming battles would take place between 1 to 3 in the afternoon. Jacob looked over at Kenith's arena. Many cultivators were leaving. Then he looked in the Dragon God Shrine's direction, but didn't see Draken and the 2 elders coming out. Sophie was a little worried as well. She stood on her tiptoes and looked towards the Dragon God Shrine. At this moment, Draken, the 2 elders, and 6 inspectors walked out of the Dragon God Shrine door. "Dad!" Sophie was finally relieved to see Draken coming out. Draken headed toward them calmly, along with Elder Liam and Elder Frank. Helen walked to them and asked worriedly, "How was it?" Draken didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked, "How were Jacob's battles?" "Not bad. He placed first in the group," Helen answered. "Oh." Draken was slightly surprised. He obviously didn't expect Jacob to win in the group. He looked at Helen and said, "The Dragon God Shrine thinks that both North and South Atlantic need to abide by the rules. They are still keeping Reggie, a top master of the South Atlantic, in their prison, and they didn't release him even though the South Atlantic Dragon Palace requested several times. Reggie murdered several inspectors. They sure won't release him," Helen said. "Therefore, they said that it's okay if we want our stuff back. But our cultivators need to rank top 3 in the Dragon God Shrine's general exams," Draken exclaimed. "But that's unfair." Helen became furious suddenly, and it even startled Sophie. Helen looked at Draken and thought for a bit before saying, "We have several 8-level elders, and it shouldn't be hard for them to rank within the top 3 in the Dragon God Shrine's general exams. But wouldn't that be beneath them? They wouldn't want to fight for the Dragon God Shrine's inspector positions. We're already giving them face to let Jacob attend this general exam in North Atlantic's name." "Isn't Uncle Kenith here this time too, Mom?" Sophie interrupted. "Your Uncle Kenith is attending as an individual. He isn't representing the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, even if he ranked within the top 3, Drake had said. "What is going on?" Jacob asked in confusion. Helen looked at Jacob, and then at the others behind them. She calmed down slightly and said, "Our North Atlantic Dragon Palace lent the Dragon God Shrine something a long time ago. The leasing period was 200 years, and the time is almost up. However, the Dragon God Shrine doesn't seem to want to return it to us." "What is it?" Sophie blinked. "You don't have to worry about that." Helen didn't answer her question. Sophie didn't push further, since she noticed Helen's bad mood. She turned to the hunchbacked General Arthur and stared at him, urging him to answer her. General Arthur took 2 steps back and shook his head when he noticed Sophie's look. He was the general of the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, so he certainly knew what Helen and Draken were talking about. However, he didn't dare to tell her that since Helen didn't say anything. Sophie then turned to Noah, since she thought he would know about it as well. However, Noah whistled as he looked around, ignoring Sophie completely. "Is it very important? Do we have to get it back? Or is it vital to the Dragon God Shrine?" Jacob hesitated for a bit before he asked. Jacob knew that Draken had his own reasons for coming to the Dragon God Shrine, and it seemed like Jacob's intuitions was correct. "This thing is very important to the Dragon God Shrine, but it's more important to the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. Due to the lack of this item, the North Atlantic Dragon Palace got slowly surpassed by the South Atlantic in the last 200 years, Draken said. The leasing period is almost up. If we don't get it back in time, it'll be difficult to get it back in the future, right?" Jacob asked, after some consideration. It was just like lend out money. If one couldn't get it back within the agreed-upon time, it would become bad debt. Draken nodded seriously. "If the Dragon God Shrine is unreasonable, our North Atlantic Dragon Palace could fight them in a battle," Helen said abruptly. Liam and Frank, who stood beside Draken, kept silent. Draken sighed. 3 of the 6 Shrine Masters have reached peak 8th level. Helen looked at Draken in surprise, and she didn't know what to say. The Dragon God Shrine had been developing rapidly over the past 200 years, and it had far surpassed the North Atlantic Dragon Palace's expectations. It had exceeded all 4 Ocean Dragon Palaces and had become the strongest dragon force. The North Atlantic Dragon Palace lent that item to the Dragon God Shrine to assist them in defending the human cultivation sects. Now it seemed like the North Atlantic wouldn't be able to get it back if the Dragon God Shrine didn't want to return it. Since Kenith is in the Dragon God Shrine as well, why don't you discuss it with him before the afternoon competitions start? Helen said. Looks like that's the only thing we can do. We have half a year left. Draken shook his head slightly. If Kenith had reached the Heavenly Dragon Realm, the Dragon God Shrine would keep this item for another half a year at most. However, since the North Atlantic Dragon Palace's strength was way weaker than the Dragon God Shrines, they would keep playing dumb. The item was essential to both the Dragon God Shrine and the North Atlantic. The fact was, the item belonged to the North Atlantic. However, in the last 200 years, it was used by the Dragon God Shrine. Jacob knew even clearer that the old Dragon King Darius had passed away. It meant that the very person who lent out the item Draken was talking about 200 years ago was no longer here. It would be even more difficult for the North Atlantic to get it back. What on earth is this item? The item that tremendously reduced the North Atlantic's strength in the last 200 years. Sophie was extremely curious, and Jacob wanted to learn more about it as well. However, Draken and Helen had been obscure about this topic, so they couldn't push the answer out of them. There were many people from all over the place around them. Even if Helen were to tell them, she would wait until they got back to the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. You can prepare for your afternoon battles. Draken let them out of the battle area so he calmed down again. Compared to other participants' elder support teams, Jacob's support team appeared youthful and lively. The average age was young, and there were quite a few beautiful girls. Also, Jacob's assisting Inspector Silver Dragon embroidery on the brown robe made him look very special as well. They're from the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. The 4 Ocean Dragon clans never attend the Dragon God Shrine's general exams. No? I heard that the participant is the future prince. No wonder. So he's not really from North Atlantic. The princess is still young. They aren't married yet. 246. He still has his identity token? So he is from the group. 4th level? He's only at 4th level? Did the Dragon God try do this on purpose? I heard that his group is the weakest group this time. Jacob and everyone around him could hear all sorts of discussions as they walked by. The cultivators in the group indeed seemed to be weaker than what Jacob had expected. Rather than crediting this to the Dragon God Shrine, he thought it was all part of Tom's plan. He assigned the high-level cultivators to other groups, so Jacob could rank top in his group. This way, Jacob would be facing real masters in the Grand Arena, and thousands of cultivators would be witnessing his loss. Tom wanted to expose Jacob's tragic loss in front of everybody. Jacob and his group went back to his room to pick up his belongings. This was Sophie's first time at the Dragon God Shrine, so she found the rooms where the participants completed their written exams fascinating. Since the written exam was done, the energy sphere over the rooms was removed. The cultivators who didn't want to go outside could take a rest in the rooms. The entire row beside 246 was empty. The crowd entered the rooms randomly, had snacks, and took a break. Everything seemed to be peaceful, but there was a tornado in disguise. Neither Helen nor Draken seemed to be as relaxed as before. Sophie went inside General Arthur's room to ask about that item, but she went back to her own room with a frown after getting no information. Kathy and the twins were sharing some rolls outside the rooms. Essence Replenishment Pill. Jacob poured an elixir pill out of the small bottle and swallowed it. Nature essence traveled throughout his body instantly. The 5 mountain bracelets prevented the nature essence from being used to a large degree, but Jacob still consumed quite a large amount of nature essence after 4 hours of battling. The battles in the afternoon would be more intense and fierce, and they would consume a lot more nature essence without a doubt. Kathy's bottle of essence replenishment pills was undoubtedly a timely help. Jacob took an empty bottle out of his bag and put 30 essence replenish pills into it. Then he threw the new bottle into his necklace. The sword energies of the sword shadow scroll dashed around rapidly in Jacob's body. 2 hours were more than enough for Jacob to fully recover. The Dragon God Shrine's bell rang. It was 1 in the afternoon. Jacob slowly pulled back his nature essence and walked out of his room. Elder Liam and the rest of them came out of their rooms as well, and they headed towards the inner city. The cultivators came in great numbers and soon filled up the area. In the past 2 hours, the news about the North Atlantic's Prince Consort attending the Dragon God Shrine's general exams got passed around. The audience all came to see how powerful this prince was. Therefore, there were many more people in the East exam area than in any of the other 3 exam areas. The regions around the arenas were congested. It's 1 in the afternoon. Let's welcome the winners, a level 3 inspector shouted after gathering all his nature essence. He stood on the grand arena, which was surrounded by 24 smaller arenas. The identity token at Jacob's waist suddenly shone with bright yellow light. In the meantime, 23 yellow lights shone in the crowd. Good luck. Helen looked at Jacob in encouragement. She hoped that Jacob would have a great fight, but she didn't count on him getting ranked in the top 3. In her opinion, he already gave his all in the arena. He used the sword shadow scroll with his fists, surprising his opponents. He could at most play outside of the box once with his actual sword array formation, and his opponents would know his trump cards. Jacob hopped to the center of the grand arena before everyone else. Then the other 23 cultivators landed in the arena with different directions. Jacob's eyes opened wide when he saw Kenith among the 23 cultivators. Kenith's face was dark, and he had a long beard on his chin, as burly as before. His firm muscles filled his brown robe up, and it seemed like he could rip the robe apart just by flexing his muscles. They lined up in 2 rows according to the ascending order of their room numbers. Jonah, with the identity token which said 197, stood opposite Jacob. Jonah looked at Jacob in disdain. He was surprised that Jacob could get out of the group, but the gossip made him believe that the Dragon God Shrine favored the North Atlantic Dragon Palace on purpose. Kenith stood diagonally across from Jacob, and there were a few cultivators between them. Jacob took the opportunity to observe Kenith. He realized that Kenith was only at the 5th level. He ranked on top of his group simply with the help of his iron fists. He didn't use the sword shadow scroll either. Kenith rolled his eyes hard at Jacob when he noticed Jacob's stare, forcing him to look away immediately. He's still so short-tempered, even after cultivating all over again, Jacob thought to himself. Jacob looked at the other 23 cultivators on the stage as they observed their opponents as well. 13 5th-level cultivators, 8 6th-level cultivators, and 2 7th-level cultivators. Jacob appeared to be the weakest, as he was only at the 4th level. 2 7th-level cultivators? Jacob remembered that Susan was also at 7th level when she attended the Dragon God Shrine's general exam. This was only the East exam area. There might be other 7th and 8th level cultivators in the other 3 exam areas. The Dragon God Shrine's general exams really attracted a lot of undiscovered talent. Among the 24 cultivators, there were 4 assisting inspectors, including Jacob. 2 of them were at the 6th level. 1 was at the 5th level. Jacob was the weakest. Jacob found another acquaintance among the 12 5th-level cultivators, Zach. The chess genius Zach, pale face was covered with scratches, and the identity token on his waist said 166. Who knew how heartbroken his fangirls would be if they saw him like this? Zach was not only the new star in the chess circle, but also a fire elemental dragon cultivator. He couldn't snatch the assisting inspector position from Jacob, so he decided to attend the Dragon God Shrine's general exam as well. "Pick your opponent," the inspector said between the two rows. Jacob was slightly surprised at this remark, since he thought that his opponent was Jonah, and he was already planning on how to defeat Jonah secretly. That might not be the case now. 166, the inspector shouted. Zach, who was covered with wounds, took half a step forward and said immediately, 246. Jacob was weakest among all the cultivators. Zach sure wanted to win a few more battles after ranking on top of his group. Therefore, he picked Jacob without even thinking. Jacob nodded at Zach, accepting his challenge. He appeared to be very calm, but he was actually worried. All he could think was, "Susan, why aren't you here yet?" He could try his best to defeat the 5th and 6th level cultivators, but 7th level cultivators were a different story. If he encountered a 7th level cultivator while wearing the 5 mountain bracelets, he would be smashed before he could do anything. It was a relief for him when Zach picked him. 289, the inspector continued. The cultivator with 289 identity token picked a 5th level cultivator as his opponent. The inspector called out the names, one by one. The 7th level cultivator, 162, picked Kenith to fight against. Kenith snorted coldly in response. When it was Jonah's turn, he picked a 5th level cultivator. However, he still glimpsed at Jacob as he made his choice. It seemed like he believed that he could get into the next round, but it was a pity for him not to be able to defeat Jacob in front of everybody. Soon enough, all 24 cultivators were paired up. 12 pairs of cultivators were led into 12 small arenas to battle at the same time. The 6 winners would be battling in the grand arena in the middle in the next round. As the 24 cultivators walked to the edge of the arena, Jacob quickened his steps after Kenith and shouted, "Elder Kenith!" Kenith turned around and stared at Jacob with his stone-cold eyes. He asked in a deep voice, "What? Do you want to beg for mercy? Don't expect mercy from me even though you have passed the initial selection round." Jacob searched through his necklace and took out a small bottle. "This is for you." "What the hell is this?" Kenith opened the bottle as he shouted. Then he sensed a strong nature essence coming out of it. Many level 4 essence replenishment pills filled up half the bottle. They were all top-tier supplements. "It would be my pleasure to battle with you, Elder Kenith." Jacob smiled before he hopped down the arena. "Uncle, Uncle!" Sophie shouted in excitement when she saw Kenith. However, Kenith hopped into his arena without hesitating. Sophie was confused. She watched Kenith dash through the air, wondering why her uncle didn't respond to her. She had no idea that Kenith's opponent was a 7th level cultivator, so he had to put in his full effort. He didn't have time to greet them at all. Jacob was assigned to battle in the arena that Zach just battled in. "Kathy, I gave half of your essence replenishment pills to Soph's uncle," Jacob said after he walked over to Helen and everyone else. Kathy was a little surprised. She didn't mind it, but she didn't understand why Jacob gave them to Kenith. Kenith seemed to be very blunt. The process of chasing after the goal as the strongest. He didn't even go to see his relatives. In other words, if Jacob were in Kenith's way of leveling up, he would show no mercy towards Jacob. It seemed a little weird for Jacob to offer the essence replenishment pills to him. Jacob's heart is something too big to predict, she thought. Kathy smiled lightly and answered, "It's okay." Then Jacob hopped into the air and headed towards his arena. There was an array formation over the Dragon God Shrine's platform. All the cultivators below 7th level weren't able to fly unless they had a high-level treasure like Helen's River Mountain painting or the Dragon God Shrine's identity token. When Jacob entered the arena, Zach was already ready for the battle. Sophie stood beside the grand arena. She looked to her left and then to her right, hesitating on whose battle to watch. "Soph, me and your dad are going to see your uncle's battle," Helen said to her, and then headed towards Kenneth's arena. Elder Liam, Elder Frank, and General Arthur followed them. Sophie stood where she was. even more indecisive than before. At this moment, Kathy, Jade, Julia, and Noah headed towards Jacob's arena without any hesitation. Since Kenneth and Jacob would be battling at the same time, they split up into two groups. Sophie looked at Helen and the others, who had already stepped further from her to the left. Then she looked at Kathy and the others, who slowly walked away to the right. She sighed hard and ran after Kathy's group. "Uncle doesn't seem to care anyway," Sophie complained to herself as she ran. At this moment, Kenneth glimpsed around his arena. He stood proudly in front of a fire elemental 7th level cultivator. He saw Draken, Helen, 2 elders, and General Arthur heading over, but didn't see Sophie with them. Kenneth shook his head as he sighed. He knew Sophie's heart was closer to Jacob already, and he silently swore, "If Jacob ever mistreats Soph, I will for sure destroy him." "Come on!" Then Kenneth shouted at the 7th level cultivator in his fighting stance. A wave of majestic aura raised from him. Jacob stood in front of Zach, 4 to 5 arenas away from Kenneth's battle. Both Jacob and Kenneth created sword energies. There were even more cultivators around Jacob's arena than those who went to watch the 7th level cultivators. The title, North Atlantic Dragon Palace's Prince, was more than enough to attract them to watch the battle. On top of that, the 7th level cultivator would for sure make it to the next round, so they would have a chance to watch an even better battle later on. But Jacob, as a 4th level cultivator, might be battling for the last time at the Dragon God Shrine. Jacob took a deep breath and looked at the crowd around the arena. Then he turned back and they both bowed at each other. Zach took out a black and white chessboard and raised it. Then 180 black chess pieces and 180 white pieces rolled out of the board. When Zach fought Jacob in the clubroom back at the university, he didn't apply his full force, since he was worried about damaging the room. He didn't know anything about Jacob's techniques because it was their first fight ever, and he also underestimated Jacob. That was why he lost twice. But since now they were at the Dragon God Shrine's arena, Zach could go all out with his treasure. The area around the arena was already extremely crowded before the battle even started. It took Sophie and the others a while to squeeze into the front row, but they immediately got pushed back and forth by the incoming cultivators. Jade and Julia couldn't bear being touched by other people, so they both used their 8th level power. As if 2 bombs exploded in the crowd, it pushed all the cultivators back. The inspectors who were in charge of maintaining order sensed 8th level powers when they were about to head over. They were astonished by the strong power. "So annoying," Noah said as he stood between Jade and Julia. Then he created a sharp white energy sphere, pushing the cultivators around him 1 meter away. An inspector of an even higher level came over to see what was going on, and he suddenly spotted Kathy, who was beside Noah. He saw the light mark shining on her shoulder. "That is the special mark from a Soul Formation Realm cultivator," he thought. Soul Formation Realm cultivator? The equivalent of the Heavenly Dragon Realm. The inspectors returned to their assigned area in a rush. There was no way that they could do anything about the order around this arena. When the surrounding cultivators were in a hectic mess, Zach and Jacob started their battle in the arena. Zach's chess pieces floated 1/2 meter above the ground like stars. They reflected each other in a well-laid-out formation. Jacob used his technique. The colorful sword energy shot out of his back and floated beside Jacob. Whoa. Many cultivators were surprised to see Jacob use his technique for the first time. Zach was the only calm one because he knew that Jacob's technique was going to be like this. Zach shook his chessboard. The chess pieces dashed toward Jacob in a very messy order. It felt like Zach picked up a handful of chess pieces randomly and threw them at Jacob. However, the pieces coordinated with each other, demonstrating that the positioning wasn't random at all. Jacob slightly turned and flipped the sword energies to block the pieces. There were sparks everywhere. The chess pieces were a part of the treasure, and they were different from the regular ones that Zach used in the classroom last time. All the pieces hidden in the chessboard were made of special rocks. They went through 49 days of forging and were as hard as diamonds. They entailed incredible power and were assigned offensive and defensive properties and corresponded to black and white colors. The fire element that these special rocks entailed was as powerful as the true flame. Jacob tried his best to defend it with sword energies. However, the pressure he felt was entirely different from the last time. Zach's chessboard treasure had been thoroughly put to use, and it was challenging to fend against it. If Jacob didn't have sword energies, he would never be able to defend himself with just one or two treasures. The chessboard is the ultimate treasure of the fire elemental dragon clan. This little cultivator borrowed the treasure from the head elder. No wonder he could rank top from his group. A cultivator beside the arena recognized the treasure and praised it. Fourth level is still just fourth level. There's a big difference between the fourth and the fifth level. I suppose he wouldn't have a chance to win against a treasure like this now, another cultivator said as he watched the battle. Seeing Jacob having trouble defending himself, Zach applied more nature essence. The chessboard's pieces gave out a ray of heated light, and all the surrounding cultivators felt strong energy. The arena ground under Jacob's feet became boiling hot, and the chess pieces caught on fire. Jacob's sword energies suddenly turned black. The 160 black sword energies were thrown back into the chess pieces. It's indeed the black water scroll again. Zach was prepared for this. He slightly shook the chessboard. The flame immediately covered up Jacob without causing any harm. He knew that Jacob was a water elemental dragon cultivator, and the black water scroll was the most authentic and relatively powerful technique amongst all water elemental techniques. Therefore, it was not surprising at all. However, the 106 black sword energies turned white within a second. Black? White? Jacob's sword energies changed as Zach's chess pieces changed, but instead of changing positions, they changed color. Black water scroll? No. White metal scroll? Zach was a little confused with the chessboard in his hand. Jacob's sword energies slowly purified after waves and waves of trembling. Metal and water, Noah murmured as he stood closer to the arena. It seemed to have put the pieces together. The white ones were the purest metal elemental sword energies, and the black ones were the purest water elemental sword energies. Break. The sword energies all sprung up. Black sword energies put on the flame on the chess pieces and knocked them away. The other 160 sword energies Jacob kept aside suddenly flew out at the moment. First, there were 160 black sword energies, and then there were 160 white sword energies. The power of 320 shooting sword energies was way stronger than that of tiny chess pieces. The chessboard in Zach's hand suddenly enlarged. The chessboard was a treasure that could both attack and defend. The chess pieces could attack, and the board could defend. The chessboard shot out a ray of black light all of a sudden under the cover of the many chess pieces. The black light hit Jacob's chest. The strong impact force pushed him 5 meters back. He tripped out of the arena. The very thing that hit Jacob's chest was nothing else but another chess piece. The 361st chess piece. Sophie screamed out as she jumped up outside the arena. Jacob suddenly released a sword energy from the bottom of his left foot, and the tip of the right foot was still in the battle arena. Break! Jacob shouted out again calmly. The sword energies surrounding Zach suddenly united and formed a web, reflecting white light. The sword energies could break through all 5 elements. Zach's mind turned blank as he felt lightning flashing through his body. The chessboard slipped out of his hand as he fell onto the ground softly. The audience around the arena didn't understand the situation yet. Jacob kicked the ground lightly with his left foot and returned to the center of the arena. The 320 sword energies returned to Jacob's body with swishing sounds. Zach was unconscious and disheveled, while Jacob was intact. Wow! The audience exclaimed. This battle lasted for 1 hour while the sword energies and the chess pieces fought with each other, but it ended in a flash. Zach used a treasure to control the chess pieces, while Jacob controlled his sword energies with his mind directly. Besides, he mostly used 160 sword energies to block the 360 chess pieces, showing people who were stronger. The inspector responsible for the arena was a little stunned as well. After a few seconds of hesitation, he finally lifted the sign. 246. There were altogether 24 small arenas in each direction, so there were 96 arenas in total. After defeating Zach, Jacob entered the top 48, which meant that even if he lost the rest of the matches, he would be among the top 50, and thus would keep the position of assisting inspector until next year's Dragon God Shrine's general exams. Aside from the 48 who would become assisting inspectors for sure, the other 2 would be chosen by the main examiners after the combat exams. "Oh, Uncle!" After seeing Jacob win the battle, Sophie suddenly remembered Kenith and immediately pushed through the crowd towards his arena. Jacob also remembered Kenith, so he leaped forward lightly and headed in that direction. Sophie, who was trying her best to squeeze through the crowd, suddenly found herself being lifted into the air. Alarmed, she looked up and found it was Jacob. "Don't move." Jacob looked down at Sophie in his arms and carried her by the waist as he flew towards his arena. Wrapped in Jacob's arms, Sophie looked at Jacob's face, feeling his arms beneath her waist. Suddenly, her heart began to race. Landing from the sky beside his arena, Jacob cleared an open space in the crowd with his presence. The cultivators around him looked at him. When they saw the silver dragon embroidered on his brown robe that was signaling his identity as an assisting inspector, they kept silent. These cultivators were elders in their respective dragon clans, but in the territory of the Dragon God Shrine, they didn't want to offend even an assisting inspector. Ignoring the surrounding cultivators, Jacob gently put Sophie onto the ground. Sophie immediately looked up at the arena. Kenith was panting, while his body was covered in blood. "Uncle!" Sophie forgot her earlier muses and screamed at the sight of Kenith. With 2 blazing fireballs on either side of him, the fire elemental 7th level cultivator stood in the center of the arena. Except for several tears in his brown robe, he seemed intact. Kenneth's right hand shook slightly, while he kept a defensive gesture, but his left hand dangled listlessly as it was broken. A burly body dropped to the ground suddenly. Sophie was about to rush over when she saw that it was the 7th level cultivator who had fallen instead of Kenith. Kenith snorted in disdain, standing firmly on the edge of the arena. He took out the bottle of pills Jacob gave him and poured out 3 white essence replenishment pills before swallowing them. Instantly, some sharp-eyed cultivators saw that Kenith's elixir pills were level 4 pills. Eating 3 level 4 pills in one go? From the looks of it, he has 1 full bottle of them, they thought. Even the level 2 inspectors by the arena envied his luxury. After all, level 4 pills were rare even in the Dragon God Shrine. After swallowing 3 essence replenishment pills, Kenith's pale face regained some luster. After kicking the 7th level cultivator out of the arena, he looked around viciously before leaping out of the arena. All the cultivators who met Kenith's gaze shivered on the inside. Down on the ground, Kenith didn't greet Drake and any others. Instead, he sat down at a spot and circulated his nature essence to heal his wounds and digest the nutrients from the essence replenishment pills. "Uncle!" Sophie was about to approach him, but Jacob stopped her. "Let him rest," Jacob said. Obviously, Jacob and Sophie had missed the climax of the battle. When they arrived at his arena, Kenith had just finished battling the 7th level cultivator. Only at the 5th level, Kenith should not be able to defeat a 7th level cultivator. Jacob couldn't imagine how Kenith managed it. With her arm in Jacob's hand, Sophie's heart raced like crazy. With a slight nod, she pulled Jacob slowly to Helen and Drake inside. "You won the match, right?" Helen looked at Jacob and asked him with a faint smile. "Yeah," Jacob nodded without hesitation. Meanwhile, another 2 pair of cultivators were still battling in the 2 arenas, but Jonah was not among them. Obviously, he had also finished his match. "Take this time to get some rest." Seeing Jacob still standing there, Sophie urged him. The cultivators who had ended their battles earlier would have more time to rest, which was essential to the upcoming fierce battles. Kathy took Jade, Julia, and Noah to Helen's side. "Master, we'll help you smooth out your meridians." Jade and Julia stood on either side of Jacob, and each took one of his arms. The moment their nature essence entered his palms, it encountered fierce resistance. Suddenly, their hands were bounced off him. "Arrays are blocking our nature essence in your body." Jade and Julia exchanged a look before looking at Jacob in surprise. Jacob laughed awkwardly, trying to smooth things over. He took out the bottle from his necklace and swallowed an essence replenishment pill before sitting down cross-legged in a cool spot. When Jade and Julia tried to follow him, Helen reached out her hands and stopped them. They wanted to find out what was wrong with Jacob's body. "This is Jacob's chance to improve himself. We better let him do it by himself," Helen said, gently while placating them with her eyes. Then, the Dragon God Shrine bell sounded. It was 3 in the afternoon. The identity token hanging by Jacob's waist shone with a yellow light. The identity token on Kenith, who was sitting not far from him, also lit up. Yellow lights lit up in 10 other places. Meanwhile, Tom, who was wearing a silver robe with a 4-clawed golden dragon embroidered on it, walked out casually in the company of a few other level 4 inspectors. As the main examiner of this region, Tom sat in the biggest armchair in the middle while the deputy examiner sat on both sides of him. With a wave of his right hand, the 12 identity tokens from the East Exam area flew into Tom's hands and instantly dimmed. It meant that another 12 cultivators were disqualified for the next round. With one wave of his hand, Tom showed everyone his authority. The remaining 12 cultivators, including Jacob, gathered in the grand arena. After Kenith had defeated one 7th-level cultivator, there was one 4th-level cultivator, which was Jacob, 4 5th-level cultivators, 6 6th-level cultivators, and 1 7th-level cultivator, and they were all males. Among the original 4 assisting inspectors, one 5th-level assisting inspector was defeated by a 6th-level cultivator, and only 2 6th-level assisting inspectors and Jacob were left. It meant that the 5th-level assisting inspector who had lost the match didn't pass the Dragon God Shrine's general exams, and thus lost his title as an assisting inspector. After winning by a narrow margin, Jacob entered the top 48, and successfully kept his title of assisting inspector. But he aimed to enter the top 10 and become an official inspector, so that he could kick Tom out of their city. The following combat exams would be held in the Grand Arena. As a crucial part of the Dragon God Shrine's general exams, the selection of official inspectors was worthy of the personal attention of Tom, the main examiner. The first match, Tom glanced at each of the 12 cultivators and paused on Jacob for half a second before continuing with a loud voice. 197 versus 246. With the token number 197 on his waist, Jonah took half a step forward. Being called by Tom, Jacob took half a step forward reluctantly. Jonah was now at the mid-tier 6th level, and was the strongest one among the 6th-level cultivators here. This move clearly showed Tom's intention. The second match, 343 versus 478. Tom continued to announce the arrangements. Each cultivator called by Tom took half a step forward. The sixth match. Before Tom could announce it, everyone knew the arrangement. Among the 12 cultivators, only 2 hadn't stepped forward yet. They were Kenith and the last 7th-level cultivator. Tom planned to have Kenith fight 2 7th-level cultivators in a row. The reason why he didn't arrange for the battle between Kenith and Jacob was that he wanted neither of them in the top 10. On the ground, Sophie looked up at Tom with gritted teeth. A moment ago, her uncle almost lost half of his life in the battle against one 7th-level cultivator, and Tom made use of his power as the main examiner to make this arrangement on purpose. Hearing the arrangement, Draken clenched his fist, and his eyes were full of fury. Knowing Kenith's identity, Tom was purposefully challenging the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. "We must ask Kenith to quit the exam," Helen said with a light sigh. "Begin." Tom waved his hand and sat back in his armchair. 10 cultivators shot out of the grand arena. In their brown robes, Jacob and Jonah stood on the large square arena that was 300 meters long and 300 meters wide. Jacob looked around. The crowd was packed, but Susan, who could remove the 5 mountain bracelets, was nowhere to be seen. "After you." Jonah lifted his right hand and signaled the beginning of the battle. Jacob looked around but still didn't see Susan. "After you," Jonah yelled again. Jacob nodded slightly and was about to get ready when he saw Susan flying out of the Dragon God Shrine. Wearing an inspector's silver robe, which had two three-clawed golden dragon embroidered on the shoulders, she immediately caught people's eyes when she flew. The percentage of female inspectors was unusually low in the Dragon God Shrine. That was why everyone's eyes lit up at the appearance of Susan, a powerful inspector. In her fluttering silver silk robe, Susan crossed the grand arena and landed by Helen's side. Jacob looked at her inspectingly, hoping that she would come over and remove the 5 mountain bracelets from him. However, she just stood by Helen's side, seeming to have forgotten about Jacob's predicament. "After you," Jonah yelled again, and his tone was laced with anger. "After you," Jacob finally answered. "Jonah, from the Spirit Mountain Dragon Clan," Jonah shouted his name while his body gradually emitted yellow light. "Jacob, from the North Atlantic Dragon Clan," Jacob said while dozens of sword energy slowly rose from his back. The atmosphere around the arena instantly tensed up. This was the first of the 6 matches, and everyone wanted to see the strengths of the top 48 cultivators. After all, they had gained the titles of assisting inspector. Their competitions in the Grand Arena would be judged by the level 4 inspectors. Jonah's aura abruptly rose. Mid-tier, 6th level. The violent air current spread outward and blew up the dust of the 900 square meter arena. Jacob's 320 sword energies twirled, full speed close to his clothes, forming an impenetrable shield that engulfed Jacob like a cocoon. Gazing at Jacob, Jonah took out a black sword and held it cautiously with both hands. "Wow, what sword is that? It's so ugly." It's crooked. Is it useful in battles?" Around the arena, some cultivators talked about themselves in surprise and bafflement. The black stone sword in Jonah's hands looked as if it had been made in a hurry with an ordinary rock. The body was crooked. The blade was not sharp. However, Helen was surprised. The cultivators, including the elders from the smaller clans, were not as knowledgeable as Helen, who knew that the sword was a treasure from the 9 Dragons' Palace. The treasures from the 9 Dragons' Palace looked crude, but their powers far surpassed ordinary treasures. Jonah was holding a primitive treasure. The 9 Dragons' Palace was opened by the 4 ocean dragon clans every 50 years, and it would descend to the first heaven after opening, attracting countless human cultivators and dragon cultivators to take the risk to break into the palace. That was why some of its treasures came out of the palace in the past hundreds of years. The Spirit Mountain Dragon Clan had acquired this primitive treasure from somewhere and gave it to Jonah, a junior in their clan, to use in this exam. In the arena, Jacob stared at the black stone sword in Jonah's hand with caution. He had been to the 9 Dragons' Palace and knew that Jonah's stone sword was definitely a treasure from there, judging from its mysterious and primitive presence. A commanding energy burst out of Jonah's black sword and mingled with his earth elemental nature essence, dashing towards Jacob. The sword energy surrounding Jacob spread before his chest like lotuses that were suddenly blooming. The 320 sword energies rushed towards the energy released by Jonah one after another. Jacob's 320 sword energies were instantly scattered by Jonah's energy. The black energy, together with Jonah's earth elemental nature essence, hit Jacob's chest and sent him flying. These scattered sword energies immediately flew to Jacob's back and supported him, preventing him from falling out of the arena. One attack. It was only one attack. Jonah's aura overshadowed Jacob's power and almost defeated him. At this moment, Jonah swung out his hands and turned his stabbing movement into a chop. It looked like a small movement, but the sword energy that was gushing out of the black sword looked like a solid sword that was heading towards Jacob's head. Dust flew up everywhere. Deep cracks were created into the hard surface of the arena, and white debris and chipped stones rained all over the arena. Such power astonished some level 2 inspectors, since the arena's dragon god shrine were made with special rocks, which were unbreakable with ordinary treasures. "Jacob!" Sophie widened her eyes and yelled anxiously. The white debris gradually settled down. Jacob wasn't lying on the ground, but stood in the air with 2 gray sword energies beneath his feet. His sword energies gave him a narrow escape. Hovering in the air, Jacob's face was pale, as if he had lost a lot of physical strength and nature essence. Outside the arena, Jade and Julia were worried. Knowing the arrays that were restricting his nature essence, they were afraid that he would be killed with the huge difference in strength that existed between him and his opponent. "Don't worry. I won't kill you." Seeming to have sensed the fear in Jacob's support team, Jonah said to Jacob, "Killing an opponent would be crossing the line. The killer would be disqualified from future exams at the Dragon God Shrine." Outside the Grand Arena stood some cultivators who had battled with Jonah before. Seeing the power of his 2 attacks, they were astonished and frightened. When Jonah fought them, he didn't take out his sword. It was clear that he was saving it for stronger opponents, such as Jacob. Dragon-breaking ninth heaven. Holding the sword with both hands, Jonah emphasized each word as he used this technique. Overwhelming energy exploded from his black sword and swept towards Jacob in the air like a tornado. Such powerful energy even affected the surrounding cultivators, and some low-leveled ones couldn't even keep their balance. Jacob's sword energies looked like colorful toys in the situation, while his body was swept up into the sky before the energy viciously dragged him to the ground. Jacob's body crashed to the rock-hard arena, creating a shallow crater. If his body had not been tempered by heavenly lightning, he would have died in the crash. "Ah!" Jacob groaned while he pushed himself up. Outside the arena, the cultivators looked at Jacob with wide eyes, thinking, "Is this guy a monster?" An ordinary 4th-level cultivator would have died, or at least been crippled after falling onto the arena from the sky. However, this 246 can still stand up. With a trace of blood dripping down the corner of his mouth, Jacob brushed off the dust with stiff hands as the 5-colored sword energies flew out of his body again. At this sight, Tom snorted with his arms crossed before his chest. The North Atlantic Dragon Palace is weak after all. With the black sword in his hands, Jonah moved closer to Jacob. The sword energies around Jacob's body began to move swiftly. "Useless. They're useless against my treasure," Jonah said confidently. Looking at Jonah in alarm, Jacob knew where his confidence came from. The primitive treasure from the 9 Dragons Palace was his greatest weapon. Outside the arena, Sophie suddenly turned her head to Helen and said, "Mom, we also have treasures from the 9 Dragons Palace." Helen smiled helplessly. Indeed, North Atlantic Dragon Palace had quite a few primitive treasures from the 9 Dragons Palace, but they rarely used them. Also, she thought it was quite unfair to use them against other cultivators during the general exams at Dragon God Shrine, since North Atlantic Dragon Clan had the advantage of having easier access to them. Meanwhile, another loud sound came from the arena. Jacob slipped back almost 6 meters while hundreds of sword energies scattered. The treasures from the 9 Dragons Palace were primitive and were not made of the 5 elements. It meant that Jacob couldn't use his lightning power against it. In theory, the godly lightning could deal with the primitive treasure, but Jonah's realm was way higher than Jacob's. The Spirit Mountain Dragon Clan put all their hopes on Jonah. After returning from Frank's martial arts academy, Jonah broke through to the 6th level, and 16 senior elders in his dragon clan spent over a month pushing Jonah's realm to mid-tier 6th level before the Dragon God Shrine's general exams. Another sword energy shot out of the black sword, and Jacob slid out another 4 meters on the arena before standing up. Around his body, the sword energies got dimmer. The blinking light of the sword energies showed the suppression of the 5 mountain bracelets. Assisting Inspector. Ha! Is this the best you can do? Ooh, so you got the title of Assisting Inspector just because you came from the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. Different from Jacob's sword energies, The earth elemental nature essence released by the black sword added the power of the black sword itself, and it was as powerful as Jacob's sword array. Another cut appeared on Jacob's shoulder while his robe was torn. The silver dragon embroideries on his shoulder were cut into pieces, revealing the bloody flesh underneath. Jade and Julia shook with rage. However, they quenched their anger since they had to abide by the rules. Jacob was not in deadly danger yet. Main Examiner. 197's treasure is too powerful. We're selecting inspectors, not treasures. Susan couldn't contain herself anymore. She suddenly flew up and yelled at Tom. The combat exams don't rule out treasures, Tom said with a lazy wave of his hand. Meanwhile, another wound appeared on Jacob's shoulder as he tried to stand up. A few drops of blood splashed onto his own face. Jacob swayed, but he didn't admit defeat. Snowflake suddenly flew out of Noah's storage space. It rushed into the arena in its level 3 snow lion form.